What we do know is that perhaps as many as 5 aircraft were used in these attacks in various parts. 2 certainly into the World Trade Center.
Both those American Airlines flights.
And 2 United planes are apparently down.
And that was number 93, Newark to San Francisco, and number 175, Boston to L.A. And
there may have been another aircraft, either a helicopter or something, into the Pentagon, which caused that explosion.
Right, we just don't know about that one as yet. But Alan Marcus says there could be as many as 8.
There are news reports, Brenda, that there are as many as 8 planes that may have taken place in these various attacks. There are reports that, in fact, one plane south of Pittsburgh was possibly headed for Camp David, and there's another plane near Camp David that is already down. There's been a car bombing reported at the State Department. The White House has been evacuated. America certainly is under attack. It's not just in New York. It goes down to the nation's capital as well.
You know, under attack, you suggested earlier when we were chatting, I'm sorry, Brenda,
That's okay.
This is the first time that attacks have been successful.
Well, if you look at the World Trade Center bombing of 10 years ago, that was a successful attack. But after that, in the early days of the Clinton administration, there were efforts to blow up monuments, tunnels, other infrastructure in New York that were thwarted by the FBI and I guess the Central
Intelligence. Alan, let me break in for a second. We just had some video here of the plane crash in Pennsylvania, but apparently that's not it there. We'll get back to that as soon as we can. So continue your thought, please.
And at that time, the Clinton administration was praised for its ability to pick up terrorists, to follow them, and to thwart those efforts. Now, however, we see where there have been very, very well organized terrorist attacks against the World Trade Center, against the nation's capital, and we appear not to have a clue as to the origin of these attacks or how much more we can anticipate.
All of us just trying to make some sense of this. You as an analyst, we as reporters and journalists, citizens of this country, we will be trying to analyze this to figure out why, what happened, and what can we do to prevent it again.
Well, we look at it this way. September 11th is the anniversary of the peace accords, the Israeli-Arabic peace accords that were done at the White House under the Carter administration. There has been in the past the Black September movement, which hijacked planes and then blew them up in the middle of the Algerian desert. We have had car bombing attacks or truck bombing attacks on the World Trade Center, and now we have today. We have to recognize that we are no longer free of these kinds of attacks. This isn't like Pearl Harbor, where it was an imperial nation, a state where we could retaliate. These are people who are willing to give up their lives to make a point. We are being punished for something that is perceived. Possibly it's our support of Israel in the Middle East. Maybe it's other things. But we are without an enemy. So one of the things George Bush has to do right now is he has to regain the confidence of the American people. We have to look forward as a nation now and not be running off in many different directions. So as Ronald Reagan did after the Challenger disaster, he has to reassure the American people, he has to be a calming influence, and then he has to show that he's in command. Because right now there are a number of pundits around saying, would this have been tried if there had been a different president, if there hadn't been the disunity, if you will, political disunity in the United States, where control of the Senate changed, where there seems to be a lack of political direction at times, where we have been kind of at peace in the world and maybe we let our guard down just a bit. Think of it, 10 years ago, in the wake of the Gulf War, could 8 planes or 5 planes or how many planes it turns out to be have been hijacked on United States soil in one day?
We're going to now take a look at some tape that we have out of Pittsburgh. As we mentioned earlier, United Airlines had confirmed that 2 of their jets today were crashed. Flight 93, Newark to San Francisco, Flight 175, Boston to L.A.
You know, Alan, when you talk about the political pundits each saying that looking for blame in some cases, and then you say we don't really have an imperial enemy to go after. What do we do? I mean, well, American people are going to demand something.
First, there's going to be the demand of how could this have happened? And then once we come to a conclusion of exactly what happened, there is going to be the retribution that has to be paid for. We remember the embassy bombings that took place a few years ago. President Clinton quickly responded to that. In fact, on the on the day after his appearance before a grand jury. Some would question whether or not that was motivated, in fact, by his weakened political stand-in. Brenda and I did a broadcast that night on that.
But Alan, when you talk about the kind of fear and grief that has gripped the nation within 3 hours in one day, the kind of fear and grief that we're going to be going through, not just within these 3 hours, not just the rest of today, but every time we look at our skyline and it's not there anymore.
Well, it's not there, and we always remember we woke up this morning safe and secure. And now it's midday, nobody's going to lunch, nobody's safe, and nobody feels secure. America has undergone a metamorphosis, a change, and it'll never change back.
And to cut out television, to cut out television in this area, people from all over the country trying to contact each other, cell phone use, things we just took for granted.
Well, I've received many panic calls today from people saying, well, we just want to make sure you weren't at the World Trade Center, because that's the hub of business in the United States, and those of us here in the East, we spend a lot of time downtown. And my daughter called from Scottsdale, Arizona, in fact. My 5-year-old granddaughter called. She was worried watching it on television, I guess, as she was ready to go to school. And she remembered Pop took me there. Mm-hmm. And so there is that kind of worry that grips the country right now. I don't think there's any work being done in any offices. People are either in prayer, they're in awe as they sit in front of televisions, or they're just saying, what next? That's what you hear a lot of, Rowan and Brenda. What's next?
Well, that's certainly the president's decision as to how he places this attack and how his administration deals with it.
Well, he has to immediately get the confidence of the American people. He has to take command. He has to be in charge. We don't know where he is right now. We're presuming that Air Force One, as Brenda indicated, is probably the only plane that can fly over American soil right now, except for the F-16s that seem to be patrolling the skies over Washington and New York. We think we saw them from our windows. We're a little east of you, flying around.
And of course, you're afraid now every time you look up and do see any kind of aircraft.
We have people in our office that are just staring at the Empire State Building, wondering if it's next. I mean, that's what's taken over this country, the fear that grips right now. We have not had this kind of a direct frontal assault on our nation's capital probably since the British sacked Washington in 1812. It's been a long time.
Probably not.